I'm sure you think you know all about the Vikings, those famous adventurers and plunderers who sailed the seas seeking fortune, glory, and territories, and all that in the span of 300 years, from the 8th to the 11th century. But were they truly the bloodthirsty barbarians we've been told they were? Thanks to their ingenuity, they crafted powerful ships.
The Vikings were definitely some of the best craftsmen. They put a lot of their pride into their ships,
with which they transformed the fate of Europe, often in a bloody way.
They disembarked by surprise, causing panic.
They were also clever merchants and craftsmen, who developed a more refined culture than we originally thought.
This is not just a rough place for barbarians. This is a community of people with taste in music and art.
On board their vessels, Vikings settled in lands still unexplored by Europeans in a more strategic way than we thought.
They don't go there by chance or accident or get lost at sea or whatever.
And the role of women remains a matter to be discussed.
Did she have warrior, commercial, or political functions?
These Scandinavians performed mysterious rites to win the gods' favors.
Every 9th year, they would sacrifice 99 horses and 99 humans.
Thanks to archaeologists, our knowledge of the Viking Age keeps growing. What can we find behind this wall?
That's the question. Oh, let's take a look and see.
My name is Benjamin Brillaud, aka Nota Bene on the web. My passion is to transmit history going against received ideas. I take you into the field close to the latest archaeological research to meet historians and scientists. Together, let's discover those we call the Vikings. My investigation begins in Denmark, one of the Vikings' cradles. In the early 8th century, there were no unified kingdoms in Scandinavia, but a set of societies reunited around their local leaders. So what motivated the emergence of the Vikings? At Ribe, archaeologists made an extraordinary discovery: the remains of a commercial port dating back to the 8th century. The excavation director, Søren Sindbæk, tells us how this market fostered the start of the Viking Age, generations before the raids.
You're standing here essentially on a lost city of the Viking Age. This was the center of the earliest town in Scandinavia, or something which is definitely different from all the villages spread around the countryside where people lived.
So it's true, as we're walking here, it's beautiful. But it's rather difficult to picture what this urban center looked like.
We'd probably be surprised because there would be no multi-story houses or big stone buildings. It's all little thatched houses. But to somebody in the Viking Age, it would look very special because it wouldn't just be farms placed on each their plot of land. It would be house next to house, next to house, next to house. And in every house, something special is taking place. Here there will be comb makers and bead makers and all sorts of craftsmen.
And the activity that took place here, compared perhaps to other ports, was it rather seasonal or all year round?
When we started our excavation, we thought that this had started out as a seasonal market, but we found out something very different. And we saw that from the very onset, there were permanent houses here all the year round.
What made Ribe such an extraordinary place in 8th century Scandinavia?
In the period leading up to the Viking Age, it's a unique site, really, because it's the only trading town here in the very early decades. Then gradually, other places like it are springing up. That's really what kept their world together, by these supermarkets in a Viking sense.
From the Danish marketplaces of Ribe, then Hedeby, to the Norwegian market of Kaupang, or even Sweden's Birka, the Scandinavians spread a whole new commercial network. They connected to international trading posts like Hamburg or Quentovik. It was a turning point of their history. To expand this trading, the craftsmen produced numerous goods intended for sale. In Ribe, plenty of these objects have been found, beautifully preserved. They highlight unknown aspects of the Scandinavian culture.
Look at this. This is what they made.
Amazing, it's really refined, plenty of details.
Exactly.
So the Vikings actually took care of themselves.
They were very elegant and they were very conscious about their looks. They were pretty well off and they had nice things like this and wore nice clothes.
Did they also wear jewelry?
Lots of that. Look at this little one. That's just one of the best pieces.
Oh,
so,
a small axe.
Yes, this is amber. It would have sort of been in a little chain or something here. Perhaps it's a religious symbol or protection symbol.
I really feel like a child in front of all this, discovering all these objects.
One of the things we found, which was really extraordinary and we really hadn't expected, was this here. I'm gonna take this out very carefully because this is a very rare object. So this was the upper part of a lyre. And this is something we always thought was just for the finest aristocrats. And here's this piece found in a small house on the street in Ribe. This is not just a rough place for barbarians. This is a community of people with taste and music and art.
So this is the very beginning of the golden age of the Vikings. Can we say that Ribe is the start of the Viking Age?
I think that it is. There's a model of how to conduct trade, and with it, sailing long distance becomes a key part of the culture, and that's what creates the Viking Age.
Strictly speaking, the term Viking refers to any person who sails at sea to acquire wealth and goods. The development of maritime transport gradually led to the design of a revolutionary ship, the Longship, which would sow panic in its path. At the Roskilde Museum, curator Morten Raven tells me the secrets of the Longship's power, a decisive element in the Vikings' expansion.
A longship is a ship which is long and slender. So in this case, when it's a large longship, it is almost 31 meters long and a little less than 4 meters wide. The longships were used for a fast transport of an armed crew. So it's quite a light design. They were very flexible and strong at the same time. So in these raids, these ships were very superior and very designed for that kind of warfare.
I'd really like to understand how these warships were built and what the different parts are that we can find on the boat.
You would design the ship in the planks in the hull. You would start by laying the keel and raising the stems, and then you would put planks on, overlapping each other, clinker built or lap strake, and these would be riveted together with iron rivets and roves. You would start then to put in different constructional timbers, like the ones that you see down here. And then finally, there's another detail. You can see it's this part of the timber right here, which is called a keelson. It's part of where you would be putting down the mast in the ship.
This longship, exhibited in Roskilde, was made of oak. It would carry around 70 men, 60 of whom could row. One of the ship's specificities was this collapsible mast, which allowed an easier navigation in case of storms, or to surprise the enemy by hiding the sail. This one measured 120 square meters and required the wool of 200 sheep. Only the wealthiest leaders could finance such exceptionally designed vessels. Without these ships, the Vikings would never have made it this far across Europe. We could say they were probably the best carpenters or the best navigators of their time.
So in terms of here in Northern Europe, the Scandinavians, the Vikings, were definitely some of the best craftsmen building with wood and building in this style. They put a lot of their pride into their ships. The top of the technology in those days was ships.
Adjacent to the museum is a shipyard where Viking ships are reproduced. Morten takes me on board a longship replica able to hold 70 sailors, so I can get an idea of the skill of these highly experienced navigators. That's a lot of people for the ship. How do they manage for food and equipment?
For a large crew like this, you would have provisions for about 1 week, and the provisions were stored below deck. You can take the deck planking out, and here below deck you could have not only provisions, but also weapons and other equipment and supplies.
On such a large ship, there's also the question of communication on board. I guess it must have been difficult to communicate?
Yeah, you should imagine when you're out at sea, there would be a lot of noise from the wind and everything surrounding you. You would also have a large square sail in the middle of the ship here at the mast, which would make it very difficult, if not impossible, for the helmsman and the skipper in this aft end of the ship to actually see where they were going. And we found out that you could use a middleman. And a middleman would be a person who would be standing here by the mast, and he would be the one who would communicate the observations done by the lookout, but also the commands from the skipper to the rest of the crew.
So in this type of boat, were there only professional warriors? Or were there also farmers looking for a better life somewhere else?
You would probably have a mixture of both quite professional warriors and also people who at some times were warriors, other times were many other things. And such a longship that we are on board now is actually quite a good place to train a crew to, instead of being just one warrior, then become part of a military unit, like a community on board a longship.
With these ships from Scandinavia, the first raid started in the middle of the 8th century. In 793, the Vikings attacked an English monastery in Lindisfarne. This plunder was seen as a sacrilege and deeply affected Christian Europe. From 799, the Northmen plunged the Franks of the Carolingian Empire into terror. I'm meeting the historian Jean Renaud, who for more than 30 years has been investigating Viking incursions in France. Hello, Jean.
Hello.
Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
So where are we?
We're on the beach of La Linière, north of Noirmoutier Island. Noirmoutier is one of the very first known targets of the Vikings in France. This beach is well situated, north of the island, easy to access, and perfect for a discreet Viking landing. They disembarked by surprise, causing panic, which was essential, taking everything of value they could get their hands on. Then they set sail again as soon as possible. All this was done pretty quickly so that no resistance could be organized.
So speed was one of the essential tactics, as was discretion, and perhaps also information and intelligence.
Indeed, the Vikings were well informed, either by hearsay or by meeting merchants during their travels. They would have heard about the prosperity of this monastery and of its port, too.
A few kilometers away from the beach, it was indeed the monastery of Saint Philibert that had attracted the Vikings. The abbey was completely destroyed a long time ago, after numerous attacks. But at the time, the raiders would have seen a vast domain surrounded by a monastic enclosure where an abbatial church stood, a cloister, and a part a sanctuary. The chapel housing the sarcophagus of Saint Philibert. East and southward, the sea bathes this monastic enclosure, creating a natural harbor. Why did the Vikings come this far? What in this abbey interested them so much?
What interested the Vikings was getting rich. They were attracted by the wealth of the place, of the abbey itself, and therefore they were also attracted by the monks' intense port activity, and in particular, their trade in salt, which was a much sought-after substance for the Vikings.
These Vikings were attacking the abbey. We can imagine that the village was nearby. Were the villagers also a source of wealth?
Ah, yes. You mean they may have taken captives? Yes, they probably did. Slavery was indeed an important source of income for the Vikings, and so it would have been part of the spoils.
For more than 40 years, the Vikings assaulted the island. Nothing was left of the abbey but a few traces in the crypt underneath the current church.
All that's left here are the walls. That dates back to the Merovingian era, or from the 7th century. St. Philibert's tomb stood here, on this very spot. This is not the original sarcophagus, but a cenotaph, an empty tomb, because the sarcophagus left with the monks when they decided to abandon the abbey in 836, following numerous Viking attacks against the monastery.
Why did the Vikings' violence leave such a mark on people's minds?
Actually, I believe the material damage was considerable, of course, but not as catastrophic as we often imagine. But the angst, the fear, and the panic are what left a lasting mark on Western collective memory. All the medieval documentation insists on the barbarism of these bloodthirsty pagans.
Were the Christian chroniclers exaggerating a bit when it came to the Vikings?
Well, violence was omnipresent in all Europe, and the clerics tended to minimize the violence of Westerners and to greatly exaggerate the violence of the Vikings. It's true that the Vikings were violent, but they weren't the only ones.
After 840, more complex operations were shaking the Carolingian Empire. Already weakened by the death of Charlemagne in 814, the empire was split in 843 between his 3 grandsons. Able to go up the river, the Viking ships took advantage of this period of civil war to strike cities inland from the coasts. The fleets expanded in number, the raids intensified, and the Vikings spent the winter on site. As for the Franks, the situation was apocalyptic. At the Fine Arts Museum of Rouen in Normandy, Lucie Malbos, specialist of medieval history, shows me a series of objects testifying to the Vikings' occupation of France.
It's always complicated to attribute objects to the Vikings, but we found weapons, like this sword, for example. A sword is not just a random object, it's a weapon, a warrior's attribute, but also a statutory item.
Of prestige.
Of prestige. And here the pommel has been carefully crafted, and for the most ordinary warriors, so to speak, they would have had other kinds of weapons.
Axes.
Axes. When we speak about the Vikings, we do not think about swords, we actually picture axes. But in practice, the most common weapons were spears. They were cheap to make, so everyone could craft one and own one, which is not the case for a sword or even an axe that required a good quality steel.
In the display cases, there's no trace of horned helmets. If they ever existed in the Viking Age, it would have only been in a religious context, and they were popularized in the 19th century through the German romantic operas of Richard Wagner. But on the battlefield, these horned helmets were never worn by the Vikings. And just below, what are all these fragments?
It's a treasure that was buried at the very end of the 9th century and that we could consider to be Viking because there were very few Carolingian coins. There were only two. Alongside the coins from England, we also have a dirham originating from the Arab Muslim world and small fragments of ingots.
To collect such an important booty, the Vikings plundered, extorted ransoms, and developed trading routes. And at the end of the 9th century, the Scandinavians seemed to be everywhere. Their attacks led to conquests in England and Ireland. Their hordes swept along the Spanish coasts, in northern Africa and in Italy. Westward, they took part in the founding of the Kievan Rus, ancestor of Ukraine and Russia. They traded up to Constantinople and Baghdad, redrawing the map of the medieval world. So I see, next to these swords and axes, two small objects that are way more refined. What are they?
That's what we call fibulas, those famous oval brooches. They always come in pairs and were worn by women to fasten an apron or a cape. And between the two, there was often a chain of multicolored glass beads. Take a look, for example, at the details and the meticulous work on these two brooches. We can distinguish small animals that look like cats, perhaps, or felines, usually with intertwined legs. These two were found in France at the edge of a small village called Pitre. They may have belonged to a Scandinavian woman. We don't know for sure, but these brooches tell the story of those women.
And what exactly was the role of these women? Were there really female warriors? I know that a grave was found in Birka of a woman with warrior-like attributes. What about it?
True, and for a long time it was thought to be a masculine grave. And within this tomb was the whole array of the Viking warrior we were talking about earlier: swords, axes, and shields. In the years 2015 to 2017, DNA analyses were carried out, and we realized that, in fact, the remains were those of a woman. Was she a warrior? Perhaps. She does not have any signs of blows or bruises, but there are plenty of other hypotheses. So we're looking at a grave which had been staged. The objects laid down were meticulously chosen. Actually, one thing is certain, and it's that this woman was someone really important. Did she have warrior or commercial functions? Or maybe political? We can't know for sure, but she definitely was an important figure.
In France, too, the Vikings didn't only behave as warriors. They also wanted land. Some of their leaders built relationships with the Franks and the Carolingian kings. The town of Rouen came to be the stronghold of one of the most famous Vikings, Rollo. In 911, King Charles the Simple offered him an alliance to protect the kingdom of the Franks against other Viking armies that often had ambitions of their own. In return, he received land around Rouen and in the region of the Lower Seine, along with the title of Count. Rollo renounced his polytheistic religious beliefs. He accepted baptism and then Christian marriage. In 933, new lands were conceded to create Normandy, the Northmen's region, an exceptional story in France. This blending of Scandinavian and other peoples intrigues me. What did the Vikings look like? Were they all tall, blonde, and blue-eyed? To find out more about it, I'm going back to Denmark, to Copenhagen University, to find biologist Ashat Margarian, who took part in the greatest DNA study of Viking Age skeletons ever.
Yeah, so we ended up collecting about 1,000 individuals from different parts of Scandinavia and the Viking world. And most of them were, of course, from Scandinavia, but we also had a lot of samples from all over the Northern Europe.
So the raw material for your work is this type of bone you found?
These are some of the bones that, for example, we use for the analysis. This is part of a Petros bone. It contains very high-quality DNA from the ancient samples. And we also work with teeth. We use usually the roots. These are also very good for DNA extraction.
These analysis techniques are recent. Published in 2020, the genetic study of the Vikings unveiled unexpected results to the world and enabled the creation of facial reconstructions.
We were able to see that, for example, the Vikings were far more diverse than we originally thought. And this is, for example, one of the reconstructions. This individual is clearly with brown eyes and black hair. As you can see, it was not like a cliché Viking with blonde hair and light eye colors, but this specific individual was looking more, let's say, Southern European individual. Statistically, Vikings probably had even higher percentage and fraction of darker hair colored individuals, so compared to the present day, for example, Danes. And yeah, that was something that we didn't expect.
It highlights the fact that there was a lot of mixing with other populations.
With this study, we actually figured out that during the Viking Age, there was some significant gene flow into the Scandinavia from the southern Europe and also from the Baltic region, east from Scandinavia. So this is something we didn't know before. When we think Viking Age, we think Vikings went out and raided, but there was also a lot of gene flow into the Scandinavia.
And researchers believe it was, among others, slaves or merchants' genes mixing with Scandinavian ones. Even more surprising, these DNA studies proved that skeletons found in a Viking graveyard on a Scottish island belonged to a local population. In other words, Scandinavian genes were not really necessary. Being a Viking was more a way of life. Pursuing their expansion, Viking explorers, mainly from Norway, discovered around 860 a remote and isolated territory, more than 1,000 kilometers away from their homeland, Iceland. According to historians, the ancient Scandinavians settled on this harsh island as early as 870, a land of ice and fire. But recently, archaeologists question this commonly admitted version. I'm now in a fjord to the east of the island in Stad. Here lies one of the most enigmatic Viking Age excavation sites. And each excavation season reveals new results. Since 2015, archaeologist Bjarni Einarsson has been exhuming remains of houses that baffle historians. It's pretty harsh here in Iceland. So why do you think that the Vikings came to colonize it?
They were not lost at sea. They were actively looking for resources in the whole of the North Atlantic area, to collect resources which were so attractive on the European market.
For the moment, 2 houses have been found on this site, on top of each other. The smallest one is a settler's farm, dating back to 870, with remains of cattle, matching with the accepted settling period in Iceland. But it's the second house that intrigues Bjarni.
What was remarkable here is that under the settlement farm is another hole, much, much bigger. So far, we have some C14 datings that indicates somewhere shortly after 800, few decades before the settlement. And that is not a settlement farm because we lack the animals. It was a seasonal occupation in this area to extract resources from the country.
According to Bjarni's research, this huge single-story building was more than 43 meters in length. Its walls, built with insulating turf and grass, were 2 meters thick. A construction with very few openings and some chimneys built on a grass-covered roof. The building would have housed between 30 and 60 individuals, under the management of a leader or the representative figure of several chiefs. On this excavation site, what type of objects did you find that are related to this ancient building?
So far, quite few. But we do have some jaspers, chalcedons, and iron, and then we have the whetstones. So if you think about the whetstones, which were used to sharpening something, and that something was used to cut, then we know that cutting things were important on this site. They were cutting animals like whales, sharks, and seals, extracting oil from mammals from the sea. It has been such a production in quantity that it must have been for export. They show us that these people were trading.
This exploitation of the island's resources, only done during the summer season, shows that there would have been a first stage of occupation before the definitive settling.
When people came here first, producing what they were producing, they not only took their products over to back home, they also took with them the knowledge about this new island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So people started to sail over the Atlantic to settle down in Iceland. So this early phase, which we can call the seasonal phase, is absolutely necessary. And on the basis of that, people decided to come and settle down.
So these Vikings were not just reckless explorers, charging ahead and leaving behind everything they owned. They had a more thoughtful approach, where they prospected and studied the resources available, and colonization was much more gradual than we commonly think.
People don't move unless they have information about the place they are moving to. They don't go there by chance or accident or get lost at sea or whatever. If I can prove it, this might change the perception of the history of Iceland quite radically.
By the end of the 9th century, some 20,000 Scandinavians settled in Iceland. To find out more about their daily lives, I'm heading to the west of the island, to Erikstadia. We'll visit a farm that's been recreated on its original site. Rain Mason, who owns this place, is going to give me an immersive glimpse into the world of these settlers' families. Hello. Who would have owned this type of house back then?
Small farmer called a bondi. They would have been free men who were farming small parcels of land that they had claimed.
Can we go in?
So this was your storeroom. You would have your firewood, your valuable tools from the farm that you don't want to leave outside. And then this was your main living area.
It's really soothing here.
There would have been about 20 people living here. The farmer, his family, and all of the people working on the farm. You would be sleeping on this side, and then this would be like your living room. You would sit here around the fire, you would cook here.
Couldn't we say that in this type of house, it would have been the bondi's wife who would have been in charge?
The wife had a really important role in the house. She was responsible for taking care of the food, managing the family, including the slaves, and she would also be responsible for the keys. So the keys to the larder, the front door, even the keys to the money box, and she would be making decisions about the financial health of the family. Women would also be doing a lot of weaving. That's another labor-intensive task. What the men are getting in on the farm, that's just to keep everybody alive. But the actual thing that the farm sells is the textiles that the women are making. So men and women had different roles, but women were still important members of the community.
But it was still a patriarchal society.
Unfortunately, it was still a patriarchal society. It's just that women had more rights here than they did in Central Europe.
And in this farm in particular, according to the sagas, lived the family of the Viking chief, Eric the Red. According to the sagas, Eric continued to explore unknown territories, founding Greenland, the first European colony of the 10th century. Around the year 1000, his son Leif Erikson, along with a generation of audacious explorers, discovered North America, which they called Vinland, 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The Viking era thus led to wonderful accomplishments. Even on the political and legal level, the Scandinavians set up an innovative system. In Iceland, there was no king with absolute power. Actually, by 930, the Scandinavian settlers had established quite an original political structure, a free state governed by free men called the Althing, which is directly inspired by the Thing imported from Scandinavia. The archipelago was led by local leaders that would gather here once a year in this absolutely majestic place, Thingvellir. The Althing is considered to be the first European parliament, founded in 930. Most likely, on this boulder, a speaker proclaimed laws out loud. In this context, each participant could have spoken about collective or commercial matters. But it would be exaggerated to see in the Althing a democratic institution. The individual mattered little. It was the group which decided on the sanctions to punish crimes and offenses. In Iceland, Scandinavian traditions evolved under the influence of the settlers. But what about their polytheistic religious practices? Which divinities did they worship? To figure it out, I have an appointment in a place that looks a bit like the moon, and that's been shaped by intense volcanic activity. Terry Gunnell spent his life studying Nordic myths. He guides me through this immense field of lava, where lies the signs of a mysterious ritual.
Here we have Surtshellir.
Yes, it's absolutely gigantic. So here, Terry, it's almost like an end-of-the-world landscape.
There was a volcanic eruption just around the time that the first people started coming here in about 870. And these were things that they'd never encountered in Norway before. And it does seem to be largely supernatural to them.
Is there a divinity associated with this particular site?
For most people within the Nordic countries, there seemed to have been an idea of gods on one side and then slightly destructive figures or more ancient figures on the other, which are sometimes called giants. And they are associated with ice, for example, and then with fire. And the one who burns up the world at the end is Surtur. So he would have been the one that's associated with something of this size, and the fires within the ground. Welcome, let's go down.
Okay.
These Nordic myths were first written in Iceland, especially in the Edda written in prose by Snorri Sturluson during the 13th century. Odin is the one sovereign ruler. His son Thor protects the gods thanks to his famous hammer. Against them, the god Loki, or evil creatures like the wolf Fenrir and Surt, will lead the world to its doom during a final battle called Ragnarok. And in this cavern, the ancient Scandinavians sought to fight in any way possible against this end of the world. So Terry, at the end of this cavern, we can see what looks like a wall.
It certainly is. It's one of the biggest man-made structures from the Viking period. It's about 3 meters high and getting towards 10 meters across here. And some of the blocks that form part of the wall are up to several tons in weight. We have two sets of stories about the place. One is that there were a number of outlaws living here, and they may have wanted to protect themselves. The other stories tell about beliefs in a being that might have lived deep inside the cave somewhere, and this was a way of keeping them in.
What's behind this wall?
So that's the question. Oh. Let's take a look and see.
Yeah.
The Vikings truly defied the elements, traversing kilometers in these dark galleries to protect themselves from the fire giant. Deep inside this tunnel of lava, we reach a strange edifice which keeps raising questions for archaeologists. What was it used for?
The purpose of it is a huge, huge mystery in all sorts of ways, especially because of what we can see in front of us over here, which is this collection of bones, which originally would have been about 30 centimeters high. And what we have down here, it's a mixture of broken cattle and pig bones especially, and then a few horses and a few sheep, and never young animals. Is it a sacrifice? Sacrifice often involves changing something from one form to another by smashing it, for example. It raises a possibility that this is some form of sacrifice that's carried out over a long period.
And you think that animal sacrifices were done to keep Surt away?
This could be the natural place, in a sense, to feed the fire demon.
And right next to it, there's a very strange stone structure. What is it?
Yes, even more puzzling. This structure that we have over here, some people initially talked about it, that it was like a boat. This is much more like a house.
Could we say in a way that we're standing here, in Surt's house?
Symbolically, the whole place is a bit like a large temple. So is it possible this was a place where a marked-off area where rituals took place?
Why did they practice this ritual? Did they really think they could stop Surt?
There seems to have been a great deal of fear about volcanic activity. This could be one way of trying to deal with it by a particular group or generations of people coming back here regularly.
The Nordic religious practices were composed of rites which responded to periods of crisis to win the gods' favor, but also to mark rites of passage, such as funerals. Sacrifices were at the center of these practices, and some were very frightening. It's back in Denmark that I will discover more about them. In Lejre, the archaeologist Julie Nelson explains to me all the different aspects of this astonishing site, even the most terrifying ones.
At this place, we have discovered these amazing stones, which is making this form of a huge stone ship. Originally, it has been around 80-90 meters long, so it's quite impressive. And around the stones and under the earth, we have discovered a Viking Age graveyard. We think that maybe this ship is a form of symbol. So maybe this has been a holy place, a sacred place, where you have buried the dead Vikings, and then this ship could bring them to the next kingdom.
When we say we buried Vikings here, which Vikings are we talking about? Were they rich people? Were they warriors?
We have 55 graves. What we know from these graves is that these are common, plain people. So these are not the royal families. They are farmers, and they don't show any signs of great Viking warriors with a lot of wounds and something like that.
Lejre was also a place of cult where great ceremonies were held, led by local elites, staging scenes of ritual processions. Fragments of Osberg tapestry, reinterpreted in drawings, offer clues on the running of the event. Chariots, horses, men and women bearing weapons, horns, and an animal mask can be seen. And this scene of hanging reflects one of the probable sacrifices that took place in Lejre.
From around the year 1000, there's a German bishop visiting Lejre. He has written down that Lejre was a place of a lot of sacrifices. So actually, every 9th year, they would sacrifice 99 horses and 99 humans. So he has described there was a lot of cultic activities going on in Lejre.
Are there any signs of these sacrifices here in Lejre?
We have one archaeological evidence about human sacrifice. We have this, what we call slave grave, because we have a man who is buried, and above him there's another man buried with him. And what we can see is that he is beheaded, and his hands and feet, they are bound. So maybe that was a kind of, if you had a slave in the living life, then you also need to have a slave with you to the next life. So maybe that's an explanation.
At the end of the 10th century, a profound change soon put an end to the Viking Age. The unification of Scandinavian kingdoms led by one king and one god. The archaeological complex of Jelling embodies this changeover through the shape of a stone ship, its artificial mounds, its runic stones, and its church. The specialist Anne Petersen shows us the importance of this place, which is considered as a sort of birth certificate of Denmark.
The whole area here must have been created by the royal family. King Gorm was probably the initiator of this site. But very quickly then, the son, King Harald, the one who is today known as King Harald Bluetooth, developed the site. This may have been an assembly site used at specific occasions when a lot of people were gathered, probably people from all the area that King Harald was interested in or ruled over. And then they would meet here. And the first meeting for King Harald may have been the meeting when everyone agreed that he was to be king. He was a very ambitious king, innovative king, but he also knew that we have to come from the past into the future. And the future is very much, at this time, a Christian future.
To strengthen his power, King Harald turned to Christianity. On this site, he raised a runic stone. It's a stone carved with runic inscriptions, the writing system of the medieval Scandinavian. It's generally in honor of a deceased person, and Harald decided to renew this tradition.
We think this is a rune stone that was raised to commemorate his parents, of course, but also to commemorate his own achievements. And what he decided to focus on is that he won for himself all of Denmark and Norway, and then that he made the Danes Christian. This is very much a political statement. Now we are a Christian kingdom, but it is possible also that the king himself was Christian and that he had his own beliefs invested in this monument.
Around 965, the Jelling stone was painted with vivid colors, according to the traditions of the time. The three faces of the stone are clearly visible, one with Harald's text describing his achievements, the second with a depiction of an animal interlaced with a snake, typical of Nordic art. And on the third face, the Christian representation of Jesus in a triumphant posture, surrounded by branches maybe symbolizing the tree of life. Here, Harald's project is to tell us a story. I Christianized Denmark. But we can agree that at the time, most people were already Christianized.
It's difficult to say from the runestone, but I believe that this transition was very much a peaceful one. I don't believe that it meant that he now forcefully converted all the Danes. I think that a lot of the Danes were Christian, were prepared to accept Christianity because missionaries had been here for a long time. At this point here, we can see change. We are moving towards kingdoms, kingship on par with what we see in other areas of Europe.
The Viking Age ended in the second part of the 11th century. Within 300 years, Scandinavian lands became Christian kingdoms, taking the form we know today. Even though we know more about the different faces of those we call Vikings than before, archaeological discoveries still raise numerous questions about them. Yet one thing is certain: the Vikings explored a large part of the globe, and the tales and legends they inspired are also constantly being reinvented in our collective imagination.